What's going on, everyone? Mike here in the BFH Garage. I'm going to cover a topic today that I swear I wasn't going to do. I've decided to go ahead and move forward with covering this topic because there's a lot of misinformation, a lot of, I would call, bad advice out there on how to resolve death wobble. Death wobble has been covered extensively on internet forums. Some videos give you some good information, and then other information is questionable. So I thought I'd put together a video regarding death wobble, and you can take this information and couple it with other information that you find, and then you can make an informed choice on how you're going to resolve your death wobble issues. Okay, before I get into talking about full-on death wobble, I want to make sure you understand the difference between death wobble, bump steer, and a steering wheel shimmy. Let's start with that steering wheel shimmy first. So when you're driving down the road and you're driving straight and your steering wheel is oscillating back and forth and you're not even trying to turn it, it's just bouncing back and forth, that's a steering wheel shimmy. That is most likely caused by out of balance tires. I just put brand new tires on my Gladiator and they didn't get the balancing just right. And here's a video of what that steering wheel shimmy looks like. Not sure if you can see that or not, but my steering wheel has a pretty good shimmy to it. These are brand new tires. They had a hard time balancing them. They wanted me to run 1,000 miles on them first and then bring them back in for balancing. That 1,000 miles does nothing. If they're not balanced, they're not balanced. So don't let a tire company try to talk you into either running them or calling it good enough, because it never is. So now I have to go back to the shop, have them rebalance that, and I should be good to go. Now, bump steer is when you're driving down the road and you have your hand here, you hit a bump, and all of a sudden you get that violent shake for just a second, and then you keep on driving and it resolves itself. So that's bump steer. That's usually caused by geometry that's off. Your track bar, it isn't parallel with your drag link, and when that happens, it'll cause some bump steer issues. Now, when you're talking full-on death wobble, if I have to explain this to you, you've never experienced it, but I can promise you that once you experience full-on death wobble, you will never forget it. So full-on death wobble is inherent in solid beam axles. It can be a truck, it can be a Jeep, it can be anything that has a solid beam axle. And death wobble is so violent that everything gets out of whack and starts oscillating so bad that you have to come to darn near a complete stop for it to resolve itself. A lot of people talk about the experience of how scared they were and thought they were going to crash, and it is no joke. I have death wobble on this right now. I beat the crap out of this thing, so I'm sure there's some things in there that might be a culprit for that, and we're going to find out today. But once you experience death wobble, there is nothing like it. It is a very violent oscillation of your front axle. All the components from the wheels, steering box, everything just starts shaking violently. You have to come to a complete stop in order to get it to resolve. So let's talk about some of the things that will cause or start that death wobble process. I want to lay a myth to rest. You see it time and time again, people on the internet saying, my steering stabilizer solved all of my death wobble issues. I'm here to tell you that a steering stabilizer, also known as a steering damper, that's what the technical term is nothing more than a Band-Aid to fix other issues. And the problem with that is that it masks what the true issue is. So I want to just drive this point home. A steering damper does not, will not fix your death wobble symptoms. The problem lies somewhere else. You need to find the root problem, and when you're done, what the steering damper does is it helps reduce any of that movement as you're driving down the road, and it helps prevent wear and tear on other parts. But in itself does not fix death wobble, okay? In fact, you don't even need to have your steering damper on. As you can see, mine's not even on here. And the reason behind that is, again, all it does is help dampen the movement of all these components and helps reduce wear over time. But if you had all new components on here and your tires were perfectly balanced, your front end set up correctly, This will drive down the road and you should not experience any of the bump steer, shimmies, or death wobble. Now, the problem is if you don't use a steering damper on a regular basis, what it will do is it will transmit a lot of that motion to the joints, like your tie rod ends, your unit bearings and things like that, and it will cause wear a little bit faster. But again, I promise you, a steering damper in and of itself is not the cure to death wobble. I'm going to start by giving you my list of things that cause death wobble, and then we'll explore each one of those individually. So we're looking at tires, we're looking at the track bar, we're looking at tie rod ends, we're looking at unit bearings, we're looking at control arm bushings, we're looking at ball joints, we're looking at control arm brackets, whether they're broken or cracked. And then lastly, we're going to be looking at that steering box. Let's go take a look at each one of those individually so you can see what I'm talking about. This is strictly my opinion, but I believe in it 100%. The biggest single culprit for death wobble, out of balance tires. Now, it doesn't sound like much, but when you start getting these big tires put on here, especially you guys running 37s and 40s and stuff like that, that's a lot of rolling mass. And when it is not balanced perfectly, that mass wants to kind of do this. And as you start getting up to speed, it starts doing this. And eventually you hit a pothole or something, it could either do a bump steer or it can go into full on death wobble. Balanced tires are the #1 reason for death wobble. Story time real quick. I had a buddy of mine at work that wanted me to take a look at his TJ. He got a quote from a shop for, it was like $2,800 to rebuild his front end because that's what was causing his death wobble. He brought it over to the shop. I looked at his tires, which were worn really bad. They were cupped, they weren't rotated, they were completely out of whack. I told him to start by getting new tires, and he looked at me kind of funny, and they did need to be replaced anyway. He got new tires, ensured that they were balanced perfectly. Everything else resolved itself. There was no other issues with that. So saved him money. He got new tires out of the deal, but we were able to solve that right off the bat before he started dumping money into the Jeep. Now, as you guys know, I'm all about saving money where I can. So I always want to start with the easiest, cheapest stuff first and then work my way towards more expensive items, unless I know that that expensive item is definitely the culprit. So again, tires being out of balance are #1. Look at me. Go get your tires balanced before you do anything else. And don't tell me that, oh, I just got them balanced not too long ago. Go watch them balance it. Go watch them bring those numbers down to 0 or very close to 0 so you personally can ensure that your tires are balanced as good as they possibly can be. Because even being a little bit out of balance can cause these things to start that oscillation. So I promise you, go get your tires balanced. So #2 for me is going to be the track bar. That's this one right here in the back. You have a track bar bracket on the axle side. You have a track bar bracket on the frame side. If this bolt is loose, it will allow this bracket to move back and forth. If the bushing is worn, it will allow that to move back and forth. Up here on the frame side, if this bolt has somehow come loose, or your Heim joint is worn, if you're using a Heim joint, or if your track bar bushing up top is worn, it's going to allow it to move back and forth. And all that back and forth movement can lead to the full oscillation, which turns into full-blown death wobble. Next thing I'm going to talk about is going to be tie rod ends. So when you're looking at your front end here, your steering components, you have your drag link here, you have your tie rod here. All of these have tie rod ends at their points of connection, and those are designed to be a wear item because they have to move. They're not a solid fixed pin that sits through there. They have to move back and forth wherever your steering goes. So those are a wear item. So one thing you want to do, check your tie rod ends, make sure they're not worn. If you pop off your tie rod here and that end just moves around and it's real loose, you probably need to replace your tie rod end. While I'm still on this camera angle here, I just want to quickly talk about the ball joints. You have your lower ball joint here, you have your upper ball joint up here, and one of the things about ball joints is when you have death wobble, that can create damage in the ball joints. So let's say your track bar was the culprit, you could still have bad ball joints because of it, especially if you experienced multiple episodes of Death Wobble. So check your ball joints and make sure those are in good shape. Okay, before we move on to the other items from this camera angle, I want to show you a quick test that you can do that's going to show you whether or not your track bar mounts or bushings need to be replaced or tightened. It's going to show you that your tie rod ends might be a little bit too loose, and it's also going to tell you a little bit about your steering box sector shaft so you can see whether or not that might be the culprit as well. This is called a dry steer test. Now understand, I'm up here on the lift right now, so it's a little bit different because this needs to be on the ground. But what's going to happen here, imagine this vehicle on the ground under its own weight. You're going to have a helper get up into the driver's seat, and they're going to turn the key forward so you can turn the steering wheel back and forth. What you're going to do is lay down in front of this, and you're going to start watching everything. You start with right here. You're going to look up here, then you're going to look at each tie rod end, make sure they look like they're operating normally, and then lastly, you're going to take a look at your steering box. So when they do the dry steer test, move the steering wheel back and forth without the vehicle running. That'll put a little bit of weight on it, so move the steering wheel back and forth. If this bolt is loose or this bushing is worn, you're going to see the track bar move back and forth separate from the mount. So the bolt or the mount could be here. You're going to see the track bar go back and forth a little bit. Now, I want to caution you that a normal rubber bushing will have a little bit of play in it. So just a little bit is okay. But if you see anything that looks like it might be substantial, I encourage you to investigate it further. And I have some video examples here in just a second. Now, up on the frame side here, same thing applies. Look at the bushing, see if the bushing is causing that movement back and forth. And you also want to check the track bar bolt and make sure it is not loose. And that dry steer test, as you go, you'll see that bolt move back and forth. So now when you get up here to your steering box, and I have a video of this somewhere, I'm going to try to include it in this video as well, as that dry steering test is going on, your steering shaft should move. Imagine a line going directly through the center of your steering shaft. That steering shaft should rotate on that line. If you have any side-to-side movement as it rotates, then you have an issue inside that steering box, and more than likely a worn bearing or something like that. Now, I do have a separate video that shows you how to rebuild these boxes. So if you're in a TJ, well, I don't know about a JK, but on a TJ anyway, with the old Saginaw boxes, you can rebuild it and get back on the road with that. So a dry steer test will be the biggest indicator for you, especially for the track bar. That's a dead giveaway for the track bar, but it's also going to let you know or take a good look where you can develop a high index of suspicion of whether or not your tie rod ends need to be replaced or not. So dry steer test, good test to determine if any of those items need replaced. Next up, we're talking about control arm bushings. So if you look right here, that's a lower control arm. This up here is an upper control arm, lower control arm, upper control arm. Now those are aftermarket control arms. They use a different style bushing than stock. Right here is a stock control arm. And if you look closely right here, you're going to see how this bushing is all dry rotted. It's cracked. I can almost move it with my hand. This one's really bad. These right here can lend to movement in that axle that you don't want. And the easiest thing to do, if you have stock control arms, it's just easier to replace them with stock control arms with the bushings already mounted in there. Yes, you can take those bushings out and replace them. It's far cheaper, or I don't know about cheaper, but it's definitely easier just to get the replacement control arms with the bushings already pressed in and install those as is. Now, along with control arms, one of the things you got to watch out for, especially if you're off-roading a lot, these brackets here can tend to crack, especially if you're using a joint such as a cleveite that doesn't have a whole lot of flex to it, or you're using a control arm that has a cleveite on one side and some sort of bushing or joint on the other side, they create a lot of stress when you start flexing. And what can happen is you're going to weaken your control arm brackets. And if you have developed a crack, you may not even see it or be able to determine that's the reason why you're getting this steering oscillation. But that crack can open up back and forth. Eventually it will fail. So while you're under here, take a flashlight, and if you need to, hose everything off real good. Look for any types of cracks or broken brackets. That'll be an indicator as well for death wobble related issues. So the last thing on the list for me to talk about are unit bearings. Unit bearings attach your axle shaft to the knuckle. Here I have a unit bearing, so you can take a closer look on what it looks like. Right here we have the 3 holes. Unit bearings are mostly the same. So whether you're in a TJ or JK, whatever, it's going to be some form of this. And the bearing, it's sealed. So it's not a wheel, well, it's technically a wheel bearing, but it's a sealed assembly hub, and the bearing's on the inside here. And what happens is once the bearing gets loose, this whole thing can rock back and forth, and that can create oscillations as well. Unit bearings now, you can check those by getting that tire up in the air. And what you're going to do is you're going to grab at the 12 o'clock and the 6 o'clock position, and you're going to try to move back and forth top to bottom. And if you have any movement or if you hear clicking, that's indicative of a bad unit bearing. Now, one thing I want to caution you against is that with a solid beam axle right here, I can grab a good tire, a good unit bearing, and move it, and the entire axle will move with it. So make sure you differentiate between axle movement and unit bearing movement. I'm going to show you that here in just a second because I know I have a bad unit bearing now. So again, going back to my Heim here, that bolt was loose, the Heim was bad, so that's one thing I replaced. I've neglected this thing like nothing else, and it's time to catch up on all my issues here. Next is going to be the unit bearing. I'm going to show you on this side what it's supposed to look like and feel like. Then I'm going to show you on this side so you can actually see what a bad one looks like. All right, if I look distorted in the camera, I had to go wide angle so you can see what's going on here. So to check a unit bearing, you're going to grab 12 o'clock, 6 o'clock, and you're going to move back and forth. You don't hear anything. You can feel the tire move up and down, but I can tell that it's connected to the axle. There's no doubt about that. So as I pull top and bottom, no issue with that one. It's a good unit bearing. Okay, spoiler alert, this one has a bad unit bearing. See if you can hear the click and notice the slight movement of the tire separate from the axle itself. I'm going to move this in closer so you can get a better look and hear it. So as you can see in here, I definitely have a bad unit bearing over here. The one on this side doesn't seem bad at all. But I'm of the mindset that if this one's going bad, this one's probably not far behind. I could be wrong, but I don't want to have to sit there and replace unit bearings on the trail side to side. So it's easier just to replace them both at the same time. So I went ahead and ordered some unit bearings. Those will come in. I'll get them both changed out, and that way it's out of my mind if I'm still experiencing any type of issue here. Now, unit bearings, Timken is had a great reputation over the years. SKF, stuff like that. I can tell you now, everything's made in China. Trying to find something that is USA made is difficult, if not impossible. So I'll just keep plugging away with Timken bearings in here. I think last time I had SKF in here. Same thing. So I'm going back to Timken, going to stick with that and see how much use I can get out of those. And again, you got to understand, if you're off-roading and you are in some pretty tough terrain, these things are going to wear faster than if you're just driving down the road, hitting a couple potholes here and there. So anytime you're off-road, especially if you're doing some of those tougher trails, these parts are going to wear out faster and they're going to be required to be replaced on a regular basis. Right now, the best price I can find on unit bearings is Rock Auto. It's October of 23 right now, and the Timken bearings I think are running right at $71. You get the SKF ones for 58, but for the difference, I decided to go back to Timken because I don't know whether the SKF was just poor quality that it didn't last. Who knows? Anyway, I'm putting all that stuff back together. I got my Heim joint replaced, so I'm eliminating all those things that probably led to death wobble. The very next thing I'm gonna do once I get this thing to where I can drive it is I'm gonna take it down, get the tire balance checked. I've driven off-road enough that there's a lot of rubber missing in parts. I wanna make sure that it's completely balanced as well, and I can eliminate all those issues that have been leading to my death wobble. Okay, one point I wanna make very clear to everybody is that if you have experienced death wobble, and you don't get it fixed right away and you experience more episodes of death wobble, one of the problems you're going to have is that it can create more damage. And what I mean by that, for every time you go through a death wobble episode, it can damage other parts downstream for wherever that other problem is. So the point I'm trying to make here is if you have experienced death wobble, get it fixed as soon as you possibly can, because if you don't and you start to experience more events of death wobble, you're going to damage other components, and then you're going to fix one thing and wonder why you still have death wobble, and that's going to be the reason. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. Again, there's a lot of other videos out there. I didn't want to do this one, but none of them kind of told the whole story of what you're looking for and why and how that stuff happens. So hopefully this helped you out. Any questions, feel free to reach out to me. My email is on the information page down at the bottom, or you can leave a comment here. If this is your first time to the channel, I appreciate every subscription that comes through. You watch my videos. That helps me out a little bit, and it helps me produce more of this kind of content in order to help you out, so it's not such a struggle. So thanks. We'll see you on the next one.